What are your superpowers again? I'm rich.
In 2005, Thomas Wayne was a saint.
Gotham's been good to our family. People less fortunate than us have been enduring very hard times.
Scratch that, he was more than a saint, actually. He was a unicorn, a benevolent old money billionaire who always had the best interest of Gotham's working class in his heart, and we all cheered. Fast forward to 2019, the inflection point. Thomas Wayne has become something else entirely. No longer a unicorn, but a beast. A cruel and vindictive industrialist turned politician, rhetorically painting Gotham's struggling underclass as clowns. And finally, in 2022, for the first time ever in a Batman film, the ghost of Thomas Wayne is put under a microscope.
Gotham's legacy of lies and murder.
Something has changed, and not just in Gotham, but in all of us as well. So why start this video about the politics of Batman with a through the years montage of Thomas Wayne? Because for a few reasons, the politics and morality of the Batman universe begin and end with Thomas Wayne. For starters, he's the spiritual and psychological foundation for Batman's less than holy crusade, the patron saint of the mythical benevolent billionaire class. Perhaps more than any other character in the Batman lore, it's Thomas Wayne's characterization that serves as a barometer for how the intended audience of each era might perceive the class disparity between the billionaire Waynes and the rest of Gotham. In the canon as we know it, he teaches his son some life lessons, throws a few mil of his bill into public works projects, gets tragically shot in an alley, cue the slow-mo pearls, and thus gives his son a lifelong permission slip to beat petty criminals to a pulp while wearing military-grade body armor. For Bruce, his father's memory has always served as the impetus for the Batman project. Bruce throws his life away in exchange for a symbol and a mission, one that ensures that no one else endures the world-breaking emotional trauma he did as a child. Thomas Wayne was always an untouchable constant of purity and justice in the Batman mythos. We could interrogate Batman, his motives, his methods, and even his sanity, but since the foundation was Thomas, the foundation was always clean. That is, until quite recently. But before we get into Joker's class-conscious remix of the core Batman mythos, we have some important groundwork to set. So what we're going to do here is take the scenic route through each era of Batman adaptation from the Burton films to the Batman and analyze how the wealth and class status of the Wayne family and the overall socioeconomic makeup of Gotham has been interpreted by different storytellers throughout the years. And while we're at it, we'll periodically zoom out and take a look at how real-world political developments set the stage for the public's inevitable reckoning with Batman's billionaire status in the modern era, culminating with a version of Batman whose wealth isn't just a passive feature, but a fundamental moral conundrum. For our purposes in this video, we're just going to be focusing on the films and some of the TV series. I'm aware that certain comics and game series have also grappled with the billionaire status of the Waynes, but since film is the way the majority of the public interfaces with Batman, our scope of interest will also be limited to film. Also, I'm not a gamer, and I don't want to speak out of turn and get the most oppressed minority group in America pissed off at me. And yes, spoilers for all Batman-related films and some TV shows as well. You've been warned. We're not going to spend a ton of time here, but there are some relevant comments to be made about Burton's interpretation of Gotham's class dynamics, even if the context he leaves out is more important than what he chooses to include. In Batman 1989, Gotham is clearly a city marred by income inequality, corruption, and urban decay. But unlike the Reeves and Nolan iterations, these attributes read more like aesthetic markers meant to illustrate a grim and gothic backdrop for the narrative rather than an incisive political comment integral to the film's themes. Bruce Wayne's wealth, for example, goes almost entirely unexamined. He's presented as an aloof yet benevolent recluse with a big house and bigger gadgets, but there's no interrogation of how his fortune was built or what social responsibility it might entail. In fact, his distance from Gotham's corruption seems to be one of his defining characteristics. He's rich enough to stand above it all, acting as a silent moral guardian untouched by the city's rot. His wealth is certainly acknowledged by the film,
And don't leave out his very large bankroll.
Remember, the more they've got, the less they're worth.
This guy must be the most worthless guy in America.
but like Burton's gothic interpretation of Gotham's grimy streets and looming spires, it serves more as eccentric window dressing for Bruce's characterization than a pointed political statement. His fortune shapes his mystique, not his morality. It's part of the costume, not the critique. It's not until 1992's Batman Returns that Burton's aesthetic gestures toward class politics start to take shape within the subtext of the film. At least, as much as a movie about a sewer-dwelling penguin man played by Danny DeVito possibly can. For the first, and so far only time in a Batman movie, the principal antagonist is an exploitative capitalist, Christopher Walken's Max Schreck. He's introduced as a ruthless industrialist willing to con and kill to protect his cartoonishly evil master plan, a power plant that, for reasons never fully explained, steals energy from Gotham's power grid instead of supplying it.
One can never have too much power.
Bruce Wayne shares class status with Schreck, but the film wastes no time drawing a sharp moral dividing line between them. Bruce opposes the power plant scheme and is portrayed as a quiet counterweight to Schreck's overt corruption.
I'm gonna fight you on this, and I've already spoken to the mayor.
The film positions Batman as not just Gotham's masked vigilante protector, but as its virtuous billionaire patriarch, shielding the public from threats in the dingy alleyways as well as the lavish corporate boardrooms. But while Bruce plays the role of Gotham's benevolent elite, it's Danny DeVito's Penguin who offers us perspective into the insidious ways class alienation can manifest in Gotham. In Batman Returns, the Penguin is presented as a twisted funhouse parallel to Bruce Wayne. Both are born into wealthy families, but where Bruce's parents love him and tragically die, Oswald's parents despise him and tragically abandon him to the sewers. Sewers that apparently house dozens of penguins, an entire cabal of proto-juggalos, and a mechanical rubber ducky that defies the laws of physics.
You didn't invite me, so I crashed!
In the wake of his abandonment, Oswald becomes a grotesque parody of ruling class aspiration, desperate to punish the privileged elites of Gotham who brutally ostracized him for all the things that made him different. Being the shrewd and calculated sewer penguin he is, he initially positions himself as a sympathetic, lovesick orphan on a vision quest to find his parents and uncover the truth of his lost life story. Even Bruce sympathizes with his plight initially.
All I want in return is a chance to find my mom and dad.
Something wrong?
No, his parents. I hope he finds them.
But that underdog narrative quickly curdles into something darker. Max Schreck co-opts Oswald's struggle and turns it into a political movement, his tragic origins repackaged into a mayoral campaign fueled by spectacle and grievance. It's a cynical PR stunt masquerading as populism, and Gotham eats it up. In the end, Batman saves the city from Oswald's vindictive political ambitions by hijacking his big campaign speech and broadcasting the harsh words he had for his would-be constituents when he thought no one was listening.
I'll take care of the squealing, wretched, pinhead puppets of Gotham.
Wouldn't it be nice if things in the real world worked out like that every now and again?
And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Whatever you want. Grab them by the pussy. You can do anything.
I didn't say that.
The Burton era offers a rich yet ultimately skewed glimpse into Gotham's class dynamics, utilizing extravagant, cartoonish villains and Bruce Wayne's unexamined privilege to illustrate the stark divide between the city's haves and have-nots. But at the end of the day, the social commentary takes a backseat to the endless fantastical Burtonisms and all the funhouse gothic aesthetics. It's not until more modern iterations of the character when Batman's inextricable billionaire status really gets put under the microscope. No. In many ways, the Nolan films, Batman Begins in particular, are even more guilty than Burton's entries of whitewashing the ruling class status of Batman and the Wayne family. And it definitely makes sense why that might be. In 2005, the word billionaire didn't have the same negative connotation it does today. After all, this was a time before the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, Occupy Wall Street, and the highly influential presidential campaigns of Bernie Sanders. In the mid-2000s, it was not only culturally acceptable, but often encouraged to revere billionaires as industrious and shrewd business galaxy brains who accrued their massive fortunes through tenacity, intellect, and always working 10 times harder than the next guy. The idea that exploitation or underhanded business tactics might play a role in their success was not nearly as mainstream as it is today. In that climate, the public was more than willing to accept a benevolent billionaire savior in the form of Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne. Batman Begins makes a concerted effort on multiple fronts to sanitize the wealth and status of Bruce and his family lineage. Nolan's depiction of Thomas Wayne is essential to this recontextualization, presenting him as a kind, philanthropic soul who willingly abdicates the corporate throne of Wayne Enterprises in favor of saving lives as a doctor in Gotham General.
Is that where you work?
No, I work at the hospital. I leave the running of our company to much better men.
Better?
Wow, more interested men.
He's an unvarnished portrait of upper-class altruism, selfless, charitable, and totally uninterested in the high life of industry and finance his family has enjoyed for decades. This portrayal, paired with Bruce's own journey of rejecting his Prince of the City moniker in service of a higher calling, paints the Wayne family as an objectively decent force for justice within the socio-political architecture of Gotham. But Nolan doesn't stop with Thomas Wayne. Batman Begins is so intent on shellacking any speck of moral indecency from the Wayne family legacy that it goes centuries out of its way to claim that Bruce's great-great-grandfather was involved in the Underground Railroad via tunnels in the Batcave.
In the Civil War, your great-great-grandfather was involved in the Underground Railroad.
By clumsily connecting the Waynes to a cause so universally moral and integral to the history of social justice in America, Nolan reveals an almost comedic and tonally ham-fisted insistence on sanitizing not only Batman and his father, but the Wayne patriarchs of 150 years ago as well. And yes, I know it's in the comics, but it's stupid there too, and it's not like Nolan was contractually obligated to include it, so moving on. So of course, since the Waynes are presented as the absolute moral arbiters of Gotham, once Bruce steps away from Wayne Enterprises to learn how to be a ninja, the corporate sharks begin circling the waters of his father's spotless legacy. As the board attempts a pivot into weapons manufacturing, the Wayne Enterprises of Bruce's time is repositioned as a company in need of moral redemption, one that Bruce must return to its original righteous purpose. But since the film never really keys us into what that original righteous purpose was, besides righteous trains, I guess, we're left with the unmistakable impression that the film's relentless insistence on reminding us how innately good the Waynes are is simply a storytelling tactic, one that allows the audience to gloss over the many moral implications of a billionaire mogul like Bruce Wayne utilizing his shadowy company's vast resources to extrajudicially brutalize the criminals of Gotham. And again, considering the era this film was born out of, Nolan's all-encompassing whitewashing campaign of the Wayne family legacy totally tracks. The public didn't need Nolan to interrogate these moral questions in 2005. We just wanted to see an updated version of Batman do some cool shit. And with The Dark Knight, Nolan doubles down on that ethos, even as the stakes get bigger and the villains become more ideologically charged. Nolan's Joker doesn't just pose a physical threat to Gotham, he challenges the very core of its moral and social order. As an agent of chaos, the Joker isn't a direct threat to the Wayne family's wealth or legacy, but instead on the systems that sustain them: capitalism, order, and the rule of law. He infiltrates and destabilizes these systems so effectively that Gotham has no choice but to turn to one man, or one Batman, to act as its savior.
When their enemies were at the gates, the Romans would suspend democracy and appoint one man to protect the city. And it wasn't considered an honor, it was considered a public service.
The Dark Knight positions Harvey Dent as a potential off-ramp for Bruce Wayne's life of vigilantism. Since he's able to work within the systems that Batman has to circumvent, Harvey represents a potential future in which Gotham wouldn't need a masked billionaire vigilante to redeem itself. But as the Joker corrupts this White Knight of Gotham, the city must once again rely on the only man with the skill set, will, and underground armory full of advanced weaponry to save the day. The fall of Harvey Dent and the lie told to preserve his legacy reinforces the idea that Gotham isn't capable of structural change, only comforting myths. Myths that Bruce Wayne is uniquely positioned to embody. Rather than interrogating the material conditions that bred the Joker in the first place, the Dark Knight simply shrugs and says,
Some men just want to watch the world burn.
And thank God, we've got a billionaire with a tank to stop him. But ultimately, the Dark Knight's themes grapple with morality, philosophy, and order versus chaos much more than any significant class critique. The Joker is presented as a moral foil to Bruce Wayne, and not because he's rich, but because he represents structure, law, and control. It's not until The Dark Knight Rises when Nolan presents a villain who is willing to challenge what the Wayne family legacy might actually mean. The Dark Knight was released a few months before the 2008 financial crisis, but by the time The Dark Knight Rises hit theaters in 2012, the public had been steeped in an anti-elite cultural climate for years at that point. People were quick to clock the similarities between the film's depiction of Bane as populist demagogue and the Occupy Wall Street movement of 2011. Nolan claimed the film was written years before Occupy began, but did acknowledge how the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis influenced the shape of the story thematically. For the first time in a Batman film, Bruce's wealth and status are treated as a complex character trait to be examined. Selina Kyle is presented as an economic foil to Bruce and his exorbitant wealth. She's a cat burglar with a class-conscious ideology that steals from members of Bruce's social strata, and even Bruce himself.
You're all gonna wonder how you ever thought you could live so large and leave so little for the rest of us.
But it's the film's primary antagonist, Bane, that offers a much more concrete and critical class critique of Batman's benevolent billionaire status. While Bruce grew up in a lavish mansion, Bane was holed away in a hellish prison.
You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it, molded by it.
The film makes ample use of this contrast, continually framing Bane's lowly and brutal childhood as a source of strength, while Bruce's privileged upbringing becomes an albatross around his neck.
Not a man from privilege.
Only when Bruce loses all the material trappings of wealth and gets knocked down to Bane's level does he finally find the strength to rise again.
I'm sorry they took all your money.
No, you're not.
Nolan presents Bane as a deranged yet highly intelligent terrorist who uses populism as a rhetorical weapon, offering Gothamites the illusion of liberation.
And we give it back to you, the people.
But in reality, his movement is nothing more than a slight rebrand of Ra's al Ghul's death cult from Batman Begins. In the wake of the Dent Act, it seems the city's crime has slowed to a crawl, but the wealth disparity between Gotham's upper crust and underclass has only calcified, which means Gothamites, much like many disenfranchised people in the real world, would be more than willing to give Bane a shot if it meant changing a broken status quo that no longer served them. Nolan even makes a point to depict Bane's foot soldiers appropriating common uniforms of the working class right before they invade the stock exchange.
It's a stock exchange. There's no money you can steal.
Really? And why are you people here?
Income inequality and anti-elite sentiment are woven through the narrative backdrop of Rises at every turn, making Bane's faux populist approach feel timely and effective.
Not our money, it's everybody's. Really? Mine's my mattress.
By the time Bruce rises from the underground prison, he returns to a Gotham City on the brink of nuclear annihilation. But for the first time ever, not as a billionaire vigilante with the moral authority and wherewithal to save the day, but instead a penniless pariah determined to face and defeat Bane on his own playing field. But for all the gesturing toward a class-conscious reinterpretation of Batman in The Dark Knight Rises, ultimately stripping Bruce of his wealth and status serves more as a narrative device to bring our noble hero down to rock bottom right before we can watch him rise back up again.
Why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves up.
In the end, it's Bruce's individual exceptionalism that saves Gotham from Bane, not to mention the multi-million-dollar UFO he got from Lucius Fox. It's also fair to point out that linking Bane and his terroristic agenda to the rhetoric of people's liberation movements could inadvertently undermine the legitimacy of the working class struggle. In a film about a billionaire vigilante, it's a bit of an issue when one of the only characters who seems to understand the plight of the working class is a violent extremist whose primary motivation is to blow up the entire city with a nuke. But to be charitable to Nolan, it's totally possible Bane's class-conscious rhetoric is meant to be viewed as a cautionary cautionary tale against demagogues who abuse the aesthetics of populism as a means to achieve their unsavory political ends. The Nolan-era Batman films are paradoxical in that in some ways they are an unabashed product of their time while being light years ahead of it in others. Batman Begins served as the perfect vehicle for reimagining Batman as a grounded and gritty anti-terrorism action thriller perfectly suited for the post-9/11 audience of the day. The Dark Knight expanded on those elements and introduced sizzling ideological tension between Batman's order and Joker's chaos. And finally, The Dark Knight Rises toyed with the idea of interrogating Batman's privilege, but ultimately pulled back from the more holistic reckoning we'd see in later iterations. And we'll get to those iterations in a minute, but first we gotta take a quick detour through the Snyder era. Honestly, you can just skip this if you want, it doesn't even fucking... If Nolan was interested in downplaying Bruce Wayne's wealth, Snyder was interested in fetishizing it, which makes total sense considering Snyder's usual MO. His superhero films have been widely criticized for putting the heroes on a godlike pedestal while relegating the powerless normies to the pay no mind list.
Even though I, for the most part, like the Snyder Cut, it still has the problem that his other movies do, which is that Zack Snyder does not give a fuck about normal people.
And since Snyder is quick to highlight what Batman's superpower actually is...
What are your superpowers again? I'm rich.
It's almost a foregone conclusion he'd be more interested in depicting his Bruce Wayne as a man who relishes the wealth, power, and status that enable his heroics. Nolan's Bruce uses billionaire playboy antics as a calculated mask to throw off suspicion, but Snyder's Bruce seems to flex for the sake of flexing. Between the quiet swagger, the matte black Aston Martin, and the posh as fuck lake compound, Batfleck reads as someone who loves being rich and couldn't care less who knows it. But since the external threats in the Snyder era are cosmic and global, there's not nearly as much focus on class critique. It's hard to find time to pontificate on the moral implications of a masked billionaire vigilante when a CGI abomination wants to destroy the universe with a math equation, somehow.
Anti-life is here.
But still, it is a form of class anxiety that defines Snyder's Batman, because for over 20 years, his wealth and vast network of resources enabled him to stand above any supervillain or criminal syndicate Gotham could spit out. It's only when he meets Superman, a being that Bruce's wealth can't intimidate, destroy, or corrupt, does he start to unravel psychologically. And sure, a lot of that is due to Bruce vengefully holding Superman accountable for the destruction of Metropolis, but that's not the whole picture. His wealth was always the feature that made him the apex predator, but Superman tears that narrative to shreds simply by existing. So naturally, he has no choice but to go full prep time and start plotting a murder. And ironically enough, it's actually Clark Kent himself who gives us one of the most direct condemnations of Batman's penchant for putting the poorest of Gothamites in the crosshairs of his vigilantism.
This Bat vigilante has been consistently targeting the port and the adjacent projects and tenements.
But beyond that, Snyder's Batman is probably the least rich iteration of the character to analyze through a class lens. He's cool, he broods, he fucks, he's Batfleck. Let's move on. Previous film entries in the Batman canon may have commented on the moral implications of the Wayne family legacy, but 2019's Joker marks the first genuine reckoning with it on screen. For the first time ever, we see Gotham through the eyes of someone who actually lives within the crumbling infrastructure of the city, not just looming high above it from a castle on the edge of town. Joker's Gotham is one plagued by deep structural rot, and Arthur is one of the many members of this Gotham's underclass who bears the brunt of the city's ills. The film drops us headfirst into the street-level results of the city's brutal austerity campaign, resulting in mass poverty, healthcare collapse, and a burgeoning crime wave. But where other Batman films would position the Wayne family as staunchly opposed to this brand of economic conservatism, Joker's Thomas Wayne seems to be one of its most vocal and prominent advocates. Here, Thomas Wayne is not the canonized old money industrialist turned Mother Teresa figure we're used to seeing. If anything, he resembles avatars of 1980s conservative animists like Ronald Reagan and Ed Koch, who saw working class anger not as a cry for economic justice, but an inconvenient nuisance to be silenced.
And until those kind of people change for the better, those of us who have made something of our lives will always look at those who haven't as nothing but clowns.
Where Nolan lionizes Thomas Wayne as a paragon of altruistic capitalism, Joker presents him as a symptomatic manifestation of upper-crust contempt, offering a much more realistic depiction of real-world ruling-class attitudes toward the working poor. By casting Thomas Wayne as a mouthpiece for the callous elite, Joker reframes Batman's billionaire savior myth into a class-conscious parable about how entrenched power not only fails the vulnerable, but helps create the very chaos it claims to oppose. Unlike Heath Ledger's Joker, who was a chaotic yet calculated criminal mastermind, Joaquin Phoenix's iteration is merely a deeply unfortunate and mentally ill man barely keeping his head above water. Ledger's Joker was an agent of chaos who wrought violence and destabilization through individual force of will. But this Joker's brand of chaos is almost entirely incidental. Through an act of overzealous self-defense, he serves as the accidental match that lights the powder keg of chaos and resentment already bubbling under the surface of Gotham. Arthur's psychological deterioration begins when the city cuts funding for the mental health services that keep him afloat.
They don't give a shit about people like you, Arthur. And they really don't give a shit about people like me either.
Without his counseling and many prescriptions, he embarks on a rapid descent into madness and alienation. But Arthur doesn't become violent as a result of an innate thirst for blood or deep-seated penchant for criminality. It's only when a subway confrontation with three privileged finance bros becomes a microcosm for the city's larger economic tensions that Arthur finally snaps, unfortunately realizing that maybe violence can actually solve some of his problems. Without any intention of his own, Arthur inadvertently becomes an anonymous symbol for the righteous rage of the discarded Gotham underclass. Because in a city on the brink of total economic catastrophe, even apolitical acts by apathetic actors can become the genesis of revolution. What begins as a retaliatory burst of senseless violence for Arthur becomes the rallying cry for droves of Gotham's oppressed to rise up against the established order. But since the movement is built on directionless anger and not coherent ideology, Arthur finds no catharsis as its figurehead. It's only in his final dream sequence where the movement results in genuine solidarity instead of reactionary outrage. This coda offers Arthur a fleeting vision of what he's wanted all along: acceptance and validation. But in reality, he remains trapped in the asylum, isolated from any true sense of purpose or community and committed to a tragic life of pointless violence. But if it's Arthur who sparks the film's revolt, it's Thomas Wayne who magnifies it. By dismissively referring to working-class Gothamites as clowns, the protesters take him at his word, donning clown masks in retaliation. And ironically, it's exactly this type of out-of-touch disdain that ultimately seals his fate. In the Batman canon proper, it's a random act of violence that orphans Bruce Wayne, but in Joker, it's a direct result of his father's vindictive ideology. In many ways, Arthur Fleck embodies something of a reverse origin story that mirrors Bruce Wayne. For Bruce, trauma creates a vigilante alter ego, empowered by wealth and resources. For Arthur, trauma creates a meaningless symbol of violence, disempowered by poverty and alienation. While Bruce chooses to don the cape and cowl and become a symbol of order, Arthur's mask is thrust upon him by a movement seeking a symbol of revolution. Both become emblematic of forces much larger than themselves. But where Bruce's wealth provides agency in shaping his destiny, Arthur's destitution and psychosis strip him of it completely. This lack of agency is expanded upon in Joker Folie à Deux, which I know isn't the greatest movie in the world, but I'll be brief. The movement Arthur unintentionally builds in the first film imbues him with intention and ideology he never believed in. Arthur isn't political.
I'm not political.
But that doesn't stop his followers from projecting their own ideals and aspirations onto him. When Arthur inevitably fails to meet the standards the mob thrust upon him, they discard him without hesitation, leaving him to die alone in prison at the hands of the next man willing to take up the mantle of the Joker. Okay, back to the good Joker movie. Joker 2019 is by no means a perfect film. It's tonally derivative and thematically heavy-handed in more than a few places. But regardless of that, it forced viewers to interrogate one of the more uncomfortable yet increasingly unavoidable questions about the core Batman mythos. Why should we assume the Wayne family is inherently decent if billionaires in the real world are anything but? For all its flaws, Joker distilled the economic anxiety and rage of the first Trump era into a digestible and thought-provoking class war film masquerading as a superhero blockbuster. Thanks to politicians like Bernie Sanders giving voice to the ramifications of worsening income inequality on the working class, a film like Joker felt more timely than ever in 2019. But beyond that, it marked a significant paradigm shift within the Batman franchise as a whole, so much so that every single adaptational entry after 2019 had to contend with Batman's class position and the issues Joker brought up concerning it. Post-Joker, you couldn't just get away with saying,
"Your great-great-grandfather was involved in the Underground Railroad,"
and calling it a day, assuming audiences would simply accept the Waynes as moral untouchables at face value. In other words, Joker opened the Pandora's box of class consciousness in Gotham. In response, the Batman mythos was forced to evolve, and 3 years later, Matt Reeves rose to that challenge. After a Nolan trilogy that many fans considered the definitive take on Batman and the lore-breaking Joker still fresh in the rearview, to say Matt Reeves had his work cut out for him with the Batman would be the understatement of the decade, but it wouldn't take long for fans to realize that Reeves wasn't here to play the hits. He was going big, and he was going bold. In The Batman, Gotham isn't just a dangerous city that breeds Jokers and Banes. It's a rotting husk with institutions not only broken but deliberately engineered to fail. The police force is almost entirely compromised, the politicians are empty suits in the mob's pocket, and Paul Dano's Riddler is picking off the most corrupt and powerful among them one by one. It's a bleak portrait of urban decay, and Robert Pattinson's Batman embodies that darkness more comprehensively than any live-action depiction to date. In the Nolan trilogy, Bruce Wayne constructs a playboy public persona to stave off suspicion, but this Bruce can't even bring himself to do that. The cape and cowl grant him a degree of confidence and aggression, but the distinction between his dual identities has eroded completely. In the face of Gotham's structural collapse, Batman has effectively swallowed Bruce Wayne. Even the illusion isn't necessary to the project anymore.
What I'm doing is my family's legacy.
He's still a billionaire who uses his immense wealth and vast resources to impose his own sense of justice on the city, but Reeves contextualizes that wealth in a way we've never before seen on screen. This is best illustrated by comparing how both Reeves and Nolan tackle the concept of the billionaire orphan.
So you showed up this one day, in a cool car, pretty girl on your arm. We were so excited. Bruce Wayne, billionaire orphan? I mean, we used to make up stories about you, man.
Living in some tower over the park isn't being an orphan. Looking down on everyone with all that money. Don't you tell me.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The political landscape of 2022, and by extension, the political landscape of Batman, was vastly different than it had been a decade prior. In the wake of Joker, the first Trump term, and a global pandemic and recession, the class politics of Batman had to evolve with the times. Given the increasing number of billionaire comic book villains cropping up in the real world, audiences had to be served proper context before rooting for a billionaire comic book hero in a movie. And much of that context is provided by Zoe Kravitz's Selina Kyle. Much like previous iterations, this Selina Kyle is a financially struggling cat burglar pushed into morally questionable labor by her precarious economic standing. She serves as a narrative counterweight to Batman, reminding him and the audience that in a city as broken as Gotham, black and white morality and life choices are often a luxury only afforded to the elite.
Jesus Christ, choices? You know, whoever the hell you are, you obviously grew up rich.
We've seen Selina Kyle call out Bruce Wayne's privilege before.
There's a storm coming, Mr. Wayne.
But there's a key difference in the way Reeves handles the same kind of exchange. Nolan's Selina takes a jab at Bruce Wayne the man, while they're surrounded by champagne and chandeliers at a high society gala. But this Selina chides Batman the Mask, all alone on a dingy rooftop with no visible markers of wealth to signify his class status. Despite not knowing the face beneath the mask, she knows the man nonetheless. Given his status, it's only natural Batman would be unaware and potentially callous about the moral concessions working-class people must sometimes make to stay afloat in a city like Gotham. But if Selina pushes Bruce to reflect on his upbringing, it's the Riddler who shatters his illusions of it entirely. The Riddler personifies the brutal consequences of Gotham's 20-year campaign of corruption and institutional rot. If Nolan's Joker is the most philosophically dense Batman villain, Reeves's Riddler is the most politically charged. Layer by layer, murder by murder, the Riddler peels back the mystery of how Gotham's future was scrapped for parts, and channels his rage with surgical precision toward the handful of powerful men responsible for it. Like Bruce, he grew up an orphan, but unlike Bruce, he grew up poor, and instead of idolizing Bruce for being an aspirational portrait of what orphans can achieve, he develops a deep-seated resentment, and not just toward Bruce, but toward the gushing sympathy he received from a city that couldn't care less about orphans without trust funds.
Let's talk about the billionaire with the lying dead daddy, because at least the money makes it go down easy.
Like Arthur Fleck, the Riddler is a product of economic austerity.
Do you know what being an orphan is? It's 30 kids to a room. You wake up screaming with rats, chewing your fingers, and every winter one of the babies die because it's so cold.
His campaign of violence serves as vengeance on the failed state of Gotham that made his childhood a living nightmare. This thirst for retribution is what tricks him into believing that Batman is actually his ally. But where Batman wants retribution against the criminals of Gotham, the Riddler wants retribution on its systems. And he's not the only one. The fact that the Riddler's extremist rhetoric and political violence resonate with so much of Gotham's underclass illustrates just how deeply the moneyed elites have unraveled the city's social fabric. Even Batman and Catwoman have fleeting moments in which they seem to indirectly endorse some of the Riddler's actions.
Maybe he's not who you thought. You make it sound like he had it coming.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that psycho's right to go after these creeps.
Initially, the Riddler's crusade is aimed at exposing Gotham's current ruling class, but once he starts digging into the Wayne family legacy, Bruce is forced to reckon with the possibility that his family might have helped build the broken system he's fighting to correct. Which brings us back to Thomas Wayne. Joker may have offered a more grounded interpretation of how someone in Thomas Wayne's position might behave, but the Batman marks the very first time his legacy is truly interrogated in a mainline franchise installment. Here, Thomas isn't an incorruptible symbol of virtue, but a flawed man with immense power, and the capacity to exploit it.
Wayne turned to longtime secret associate Carmine Falcone and had him murdered.
The revelations about Thomas Wayne and his checkered past come from three different perspectives in this film, each one shaped by personal biases and ulterior motives. First, the Riddler characterizes Thomas as a man so entrenched in Gotham's corruption that he orders the death of a journalist to protect politically damaging family secrets.
Gotham's legacy of lies and murder.
Then Falcone corroborates part of the story, confirming that Thomas did indeed approach him for the hit, but insists that Thomas was killed shortly thereafter by Salvatore Maroni.
You thought your father was a Boy Scout.
And finally, Alfred offers a more sympathetic account, claiming that Thomas never intended for the journalist to die and only turned to Falcone out of desperation. After the hit was carried out, Thomas threatened to go to the police and was killed with his wife later that very night.
Your father was distraught.
And what makes this so interesting is that all three men have very good reason to distort the truth about Thomas. The Riddler resents Bruce and wants to destroy the idealized image he holds of his father. Falcone wants to manipulate Bruce, diverting blame away from himself and toward his rival Maroni. And Alfred wants to absolve Bruce, seeking to shield him from the painful reality of his father's darkest moment. By introducing these conflicting accounts, Reeves rejects the mythologizing of the Nolan years in favor of a far more human and grounded approach to depicting Thomas Wayne. For decades, the Batman film franchise has presented Thomas as a saintly martyr, a steadfast symbol of Gotham's idyllic past. But the Batman complicates that symbol by dragging the ghost of Thomas from the hallowed halls of Wayne Manor and down into the filth and confusion of Gotham's seedy underbelly. The Batman proved it wasn't just possible, but far more compelling to move beyond the fixed ideal of Thomas Wayne and portray him as he always should have been, just as messy and complicated as everyone else. But just as the film forces Bruce to reckon with his father's legacy, it also challenges him to reckon with his own. At the beginning beginning of the film, vengeance is so integral to Batman's mission that he wears the word proudly as a secondary moniker. For Bruce, exacting vengeance on the criminal element that cost him his childhood is the only way to make an impact on the city. It's only when he hears one of the Riddler's followers echo his own words, "I'm vengeance," that he's finally confronted with the original sin of his mission. In that exchange, Bruce learns that he's not only striking fear into the hearts of criminals, but offering a blueprint of violence for angry, misguided men to follow. Vengeance is exposed as fundamentally hollow, and any project using it as a guiding principle can never heal, build, or save anything. It can only destroy. Bruce leads the terrorized people of Gotham from the flooded arena with a bright red flare, symbolizing his choice to abandon vengeance in favor of solidarity and hope. He realizes that if he ever hopes to change Gotham, he must become a part of it. Standing sentry on the city's edge with $1 billion and a cool car will do nothing but satisfy his own violent impulses. And ultimately, this is what sets the Batman apart from every other installment in the mainline franchise. Burton's Batman was an aloof recluse, insulated by wealth and moral superiority. Nolan's was fractured by trauma, transforming himself into a detached, untouchable symbol of individual exceptionalism. But Reeves's Batman broke the mold by learning and living by the most important truth any ethical superhero must face. You're not above the people you're trying to save. You're one of them. Not the show, I'm just saying, like, Batman beyond the Batman, you know? After Joker and the Batman, this franchise and mythos are in a very interesting state of flux regarding the class politics of Gotham. Between the Penguin, the Flash, and Harley Quinn, there's been a stark difference in the way this subject matter is handled in the 2020s. Thematically, last year's The Penguin picks up right where Matt Reeves left off in many ways. The series pits mafia middle manager Oz Cobb against the entrenched elites of his world, the children of Carmine Falcone and the made men of his family. After Carmine's death leaves a power vacuum in Gotham's criminal underworld, Oz seizes the opportunity to take his slice of the pie from those he describes as
never hungry, born full.
In fact, the series kicks off with Oz shooting the Italian-American stand-in for Kendall Roy like 5 times in the chest.
Brownstones, water towers, trees, skyscrapers.
Unlike Batman, Oz isn't trying to save Gotham. He's simply trying to win at the only game he's ever known how to play. But as it turns out, upward mobility in the mob is just as tricky as it is for us working stiffs. The people with a seat at the table have had one their entire lives, and they're not giving it up just because you asked. The Penguin proves that in Gotham, power isn't just corrupting, it's inherited. And Oz, despite his psychopathy, is still the closest thing we've seen to an outsider breaking in. For what little we saw of Batfleck in his last outing in the DCEU, The Flash did contain at least one very memorable moment.
I developed this all-powerful persona to compensate for my childhood trauma. I would do a lot better just giving all that money, man. If I really want to end crime, I should end poverty.
And despite the fact that the scene is played for laughs, it does cut right to the heart of the issue with a billionaire vigilante who'd rather use his fists and gadgets to fight crime than his net worth to address the root cause of it. But the growing trend of class critique in Gotham isn't only reserved for big-budget blockbusters and prestige TV, because even the animated spin-offs outside the Bat franchise have an angle.
Wayne Tech promised an electric car by this year. Where's my goddamn electric car, Bruce?
When Batman is drawing comparisons to one of the most hated billionaires in the world, you know there's been a big cultural shift from the days when this
Your great-great-grandfather was involved in the Underground Railroad.
Was the norm. And yes, I know that was in 2020, well before Elon bought Twitter, then ruined Twitter, then got in bed with Trump, then gutted the federal government, yada yada yada. I know. Moving forward, I have to imagine creatives like Matt Reeves and James Gunn will only continue to take the critique further from here. As class divisions in the real world sharpen, the Batman franchise will recalibrate to reflect the political landscape of the times. Because while yes, there is an inherent problem with a billionaire turning the city that orphaned him into a personal punching bag, but if these newest installments have proved anything, it's that Batman can evolve beyond that. In these stories, Gotham's problems are no longer personal, they're systemic. You can't punch your way to a better city anymore because the real villains aren't hiding in dark alleys. They're out in the open, insulated by power and free to step out into the light. They're at galas, precincts, corporate boards, and high-rise penthouses. And if Gotham's ever going to change, its heroes can't only be symbols. They have to be citizens. Well, as always, thanks so much to everyone who made it this far. Like and subscribe for more content like this, and I'll catch y'all soon.